The shotgun blast tore through the tranquil evening air, shattering the peace of Eliza Browning's small homestead just as surely as her husband's drunken rage had shattered her hopes for a peaceful life. It was 1878 in the dusty plains of Wyoming territory, and Eliza stood frozen on her porch, watching as the stranger who'd appeared at her property mere hours ago faced down her husband with a steady hand and steadier gaze. Eliza's husband, Frank Browning, swayed drunkenly in the yard, pointing his revolver with dangerous unpredictability. The tall cowboy stood 20 paces away, his own gun still holstered, hands raised slightly in a gesture that somehow conveyed both peace and warning. "Mr. Browning," the cowboy called, his voice carrying across the yard with calm authority, "I believe you've had enough excitement for one night. Why don't you lower that weapon and head inside?" Frank's response was another wild shot that kicked up dirt near the stranger's boots. 3 weeks earlier, Eliza had been hanging laundry when the cowboy first rode onto her property. His horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, had looked nearly as exhausted as the man himself. "Madam," he'd called, removing his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair, "name's Cole Whittaker. I wonder if I might trouble you for some water, for my horse and myself." Eliza had hesitated. With Frank away on one of his increasingly frequent trips to town, which always ended with him returning home drunk and angry, she was wary of strangers. But there was something in this man's eyes, a clear earnestness that put her at ease despite her caution. "Of course," she'd replied, gesturing to the well. "Help yourself, Mr. Whittaker." As he watered his horse, Eliza noticed his skilled, gentle hands, the way he murmured soothingly to the animal. She also noticed the way he winced when he reached across his body. "You're injured," she stated plainly. Cole straightened, a flash of surprise crossing his face before he composed himself. "It's nothing, madam, disagreement with some thorny brush while tracking strays." "I've seen enough injuries to know that's no scrape from brambles," Eliza said, crossing her arms. "Let me take a look." To her surprise, he hadn't argued. After a moment's consideration, he'd unbuttoned his shirt enough to reveal a shallow knife wound across his ribs. "Disagreement with a man, then," Eliza had said as she led him to her porch, "though I suspect the brambles might have been kinder." That was how it started, with clean water and bandages, with Eliza's careful hands tending to a stranger's wound. Cole had offered to repay her kindness by helping with repairs around the homestead, and with Frank gone, Eliza had accepted. For 2 weeks, Cole had returned daily, fixing the sagging porch, mending fences, and repairing the leaky roof. They talked as they worked about the land, the changing seasons, the difficulties of homestead life. Eliza learned he'd been a ranch hand at the Big Sky spread 20 miles north, but had left after a disagreement with the foreman. She noticed he was careful never to mention what that disagreement was about. Eliza found herself watching for him each morning, enjoying the quiet competence with which he worked and the respectful way he spoke to her. It had been years since a man had spoken to her as though her thoughts mattered. She learned he could read better than she could, and sometimes in the evenings, he would read to her from the few books she owned. His voice, warm and steady as he recited poetry, made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't felt since before she married Frank 7 years ago. What began as gratitude for his help soon blossomed into something more complicated. Eliza caught herself watching the way sunlight played across his features as he worked, noticing how his smile transformed his entire face when he truly meant it. She found reasons to be near him, bringing him water or food, asking questions about his work that didn't need asking. Cole, for his part, never overstepped, maintaining a respectful distance even as his eyes occasionally lingered on her longer than necessary. But Eliza felt the tension growing between them, an unspoken recognition of mutual attraction that neither dared acknowledge. It was on the afternoon of the 3rd week that everything changed. Cole was repairing the henhouse when Eliza brought him a glass of lemonade. Their fingers touched during the exchange and neither pulled away. "Eliza," he'd said softly, the first time he'd used her given name, "I should tell you something," but before he could continue, they'd heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Frank was returning days earlier than expected. Cole had quickly gathered his tools and disappeared into the nearby woods, leaving Eliza to face her husband alone. Frank had returned in one of his darker moods, drinking heavily from a whiskey bottle as soon as he dismounted. He'd stumbled into the house, demanding food, complaining about everything: the meal, the state of the house, Eliza's appearance. When he noticed the repairs, his bloodshot eyes had narrowed suspiciously. "Who's been here?" he demanded, his words slurring. "Who's been helping you?" "No one," Eliza had lied, her heart pounding. "I did it myself," Frank had laughed cruelly. You can barely hammer a nail straight." He'd grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "Don't lie to me, woman." When she'd maintained her story, he'd grown increasingly agitated, eventually passing out in a drunken stupor. Eliza had spent the night in fearful wakefulness, praying Cole wouldn't return the next morning, but he had. And Frank, nursing a terrible hangover, had seen him from the window. Without a word to Eliza, Frank had grabbed his gun and stormed outside, firing a warning shot into the air. Which brought them to this moment: Frank drunk again after spending the day with his bottle, waving his gun at the cowboy who'd made the mistake of returning at dusk to check on Eliza. "You think I don't know what's going on?" Frank shouted, his words running together. "Think I don't see how you look at my wife, Mr. Browning," Cole replied evenly. "I've only been helping with repairs, nothing more." "Liar," Frank spat, firing another wild shot that went wide. "I've seen plenty of men like you, thinking you can just take whatever you want." Eliza stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Frank, please, he's just been fixing things around the property. Put the gun down." Frank turned toward her, his expression twisting with rage. "Shut your mouth. You've been making a fool of me behind my back." What happened next unfolded in horrifying clarity. Frank swung the gun toward Eliza, his finger tightening on the trigger. Cole moved with astonishing speed, drawing his revolver and firing in one fluid motion. The bullet struck Frank's shoulder, causing his shot to go wide as he crumpled to the ground, howling in pain. Cole was at Frank's side in an instant, kicking away the fallen gun while Eliza stood frozen in shock. Blood bloomed across Frank's shirt, but even as he clutched his shoulder, he continued to hurl obscenities at them both. "We need to get him to a doctor," Cole said, turning to Eliza. "He'll live, but that wound needs tending." Eliza nodded numbly, helping Cole load her cursing husband into their wagon. As they made the tense journey to town, Frank alternated between unconsciousness and bitter accusations. Eliza sat rigidly beside Cole, who drove the team with firm, steady hands. "I'm sorry," he said quietly as the lights of town appeared in the distance. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "You saved my life," Eliza replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He would have killed me." The town doctor took charge of Frank immediately. As they waited outside the surgery, Sheriff Thomas appeared, demanding to know what had happened. Cole told the truth without embellishment, that Frank had threatened his wife and Cole had acted to protect her. Witnesses from town confirmed Frank's drunken state when he'd ridden out hours earlier, and the sheriff, who had dealt with Frank's disorderly behavior many times before, seemed inclined to believe Cole's account. "Mrs. Browning," the sheriff asked gently, "is what Mr. Whittaker says true?" "Did your husband threaten you with that gun?" Eliza stared at her hands, then raised her eyes to meet the sheriff's gaze. "Yes," she said, and the single word seemed to lift an enormous weight from her shoulders. "And it wasn't the first time." With that admission, Eliza felt something break and reform inside her, a resolve crystallizing where fear had long resided. She rolled up her sleeve to reveal the fresh bruises on her arm, then described the years of abuse she'd endured. The doctor emerged to report that Frank would survive, but would need to remain under observation. Sheriff Thomas decided to keep Frank in custody once he was well enough, pending charges for attempted murder. "You can't stay at your place alone tonight," the sheriff told Eliza. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Before she could answer, the hotel owner's wife stepped forward. "She can stay with us, Sheriff. We have a spare room." As arrangements were made, Cole approached Eliza. "I'll head back to your homestead and look after the animals," he offered. "Unless you'd prefer I stay clear entirely." No, Eliza said quickly. I would appreciate your help. That night, alone in the strange bedroom, Eliza wept not for her husband, but for the years she'd lost to fear, for the woman she might have been without it. By morning, a calm determination had replaced her tears. Over the next week, as Frank recovered under guard, Eliza made decisions that would have terrified her before. She visited a lawyer who explained that, under territorial law, she could file for divorce on grounds of cruelty. She went to the bank to discuss the homestead, which had been purchased with money from her father's estate. She discovered that because the property was in her name, Frank had no claim to it. Cole remained at the homestead, caring for the livestock and keeping everything in order. When Eliza returned from town, he was there, respectful and supportive but careful to maintain propriety now that the whole town was watching. One evening, as they sat on the porch, the setting sun painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks, Cole cleared his throat. "I've been thinking I should move on," he said quietly. "People talk, and the last thing you need is more complications." Eliza turned to him, studying his profile in the fading light. "Is that what you want, to leave?" Cole met her gaze, his expression troubled. "What I want doesn't matter much. What matters is what's best for you." "I've spent 7 years letting someone else decide what was best for me," Eliza replied, a new strength in her voice. "I won't do that anymore, so I'm asking what you want, Cole." The honesty in his eyes nearly took her breath away. "I want to stay," he admitted, "but not if it costs you your reputation or your peace of mind." Eliza reached out slowly and placed her hand over his. "Then stay, at least until we know what happens with Frank." 2 weeks later, the circuit judge arrived in town. Frank had recovered enough to stand trial for attempted murder. The proceedings were brief, with multiple witnesses testifying to Frank's threats and violent behavior. When Eliza took the stand and calmly described years of abuse culminating in him pointing a loaded gun at her, many in the courtroom wept. The judge sentenced Frank to 5 years in the territorial prison. After the verdict, Frank was allowed to speak to Eliza one last time under the sheriff's watchful eye. Surprisingly, Frank seemed sober and subdued. "I wasn't always like this," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I remember when we first married, I had such plans." "So did I," Eliza replied softly. "The divorce papers, I'll sign them," he said. "It's the least I can do." He finally looked at her. "I'm sorry, Eliza, for everything." As Frank was led away, Eliza felt no triumph or joy, only a profound relief that one chapter of her life was ending. The divorce was granted quickly, unusual in those times but influenced by the circumstances and Frank's willingness to sign the papers. Eliza reclaimed her maiden name and found herself, at 26, with a fresh chance at life. Cole remained, helping with the homestead, but their relationship existed in a careful limbo. The attraction between them was undeniable, but both were hesitant to act on it. Cole out of respect for what Eliza had endured, and Eliza out of a need to rediscover herself before giving her heart to anyone. Summer faded into autumn, and as the aspen leaves turned golden, something shifted between them. They began to talk more openly about their pasts, Cole revealing that he'd left the Big Sky Ranch after refusing to participate in the foreman's plan to drive a widow off her valuable land. Eliza sharing dreams she'd abandoned years ago of writing stories for publication. One crisp October evening, Cole arrived with a small wrapped package. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For your stories," he explained, suddenly looking uncertain. "I noticed you writing on scraps of paper and thought." Eliza traced her fingers over the smooth cover. "It's perfect," she whispered, blinking back tears. "Thank you." That night, sitting by the fire, Cole finally told her the full truth about his confrontation at the Big Sky Ranch, how he'd discovered the foreman's scheme to intimidate neighboring smallholders into selling their land cheaply. How he'd stood against men he'd worked alongside for years, and how the knife wound she'd tended had been his reward for warning the widow. "I couldn't stand by and watch it happen," he said, staring into the flames. "Some things a man can't live with." Eliza reached for his hand. "You're a good man, Cole Whittaker, better than most." Their fingers intertwined, and when their eyes met, the last barriers between them dissolved. Cole leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but Eliza met him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. As winter settled over the homestead, Cole built a small cabin on the property's edge. Though tongues wagged in town about their arrangement, Eliza found she cared less and less about others' opinions. She was learning to trust her own judgment again, to believe in her own worth. They developed a comfortable routine, working together during the day, sharing meals in the evening, then parting ways until morning. Sometimes Cole would read to her, or she would share stories she'd written in the journal. Their kisses grew more frequent, more confident, but both understood the importance of moving slowly, of building something solid and true. Winter's harshness tested them. A blizzard struck in January, stranding them for days. Together they fought to keep the livestock alive, taking shifts to check on the animals in the barn. During one particularly bitter night, they huddled together for warmth, talking until dawn about their hopes for the future. It was during that blizzard that Cole first told Eliza he loved her, his voice steady and certain in the darkness. She'd turned in his arms, finding his face with her fingertips. "I love you too," she'd whispered. "I think I have since you fixed my porch steps." Spring's arrival brought new possibilities. As the land awakened from winter's grip, Eliza received news that a story she'd submitted to a magazine in Denver had been accepted for publication. Cole surprised her with a proposal that came not with a ring, but with architectural drawings, plans for expanding the main house, for building a life together. "I don't have much to offer except these hands and my word," he told her, standing in the newly plowed field. "But everything I am is yours if you'll have me." Eliza's answer was to throw her arms around him, laughing and crying at once. They were married in May, with wildflowers blossoming across the prairie. The ceremony was small, just a few neighbors and the friends they'd made in town over the months. The sheriff attended, as did the doctor and his wife, the hotel owners who had sheltered Eliza on that fateful night, and even the widow from the Big Sky dispute, who had become a dear friend. As Eliza and Cole spoke their vows beneath a clear Wyoming sky, she reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought them together. A drunk husband with a gun, a courageous cowboy, a single shot that had changed everything. These unlikely beginnings had somehow led to this moment of perfect joy. Their first year of marriage brought both challenges and triumphs. The homestead prospered under their combined efforts. Cole's knowledge of cattle helped them build a small but healthy herd, while Eliza's garden produced abundantly. Her stories continued to find audiences in magazines back east, bringing in welcome additional income. In their second year together, Eliza discovered she was expecting. The pregnancy was difficult, with complications that brought the doctor from town multiple times. Cole rarely left her side, his worry evident in the new lines around his eyes. When their daughter arrived in the deep of winter, tiny but strong lunged, both parents wept with relief and joy. They named her Hope, for that was what she represented to them, both the promise of a future neither had dared imagine before finding each other. As Hope grew from infant to toddler, the homestead expanded. Cole's careful management and Eliza's budding business acumen transformed their modest property into a respectable small ranch. They hired 2 hands to help with the increasing workload, built a larger barn, and added rooms to the house. 4 years after Hope's birth, they welcomed twin boys Samuel and Daniel, who brought equal measures of chaos and delight to the household. Cole proved to be a natural father, patient and playful, teaching the children about the land and animals with the same gentle care he showed their mother. 10 years after the night Frank Browning had returned drunk with a gun, the Whittaker Ranch hosted a gathering to celebrate Eliza's latest achievement, the publication of her first novel. A tale of frontier courage that had garnered attention from literary circles in New York. As friends and neighbors congratulated her, Eliza found herself watching Cole across the room, still handsome though now with silver threading through his hair at the temples. When their eyes met, The connection between them was as powerful as it had been that first evening on the porch. Later, as they stood together on that same porch watching the stars appear, Cole wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Eliza leaned back against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Never," she admitted. "But I wouldn't change a single step of the journey. Not even the night with the gun," he asked, his tone light but with an undercurrent of seriousness. "Especially not that night," Eliza replied, turning in his arms to face him. "That was the night I found my courage. The night everything changed." Cole traced the line of her cheek with gentle fingers. "You always had courage, Eliza. You just needed the chance to remember it." As they stood together in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the home they'd built and the family they'd created, Eliza reflected on how life's darkest moments could sometimes lead to unexpected light. What had begun in violence and fear had transformed into something beautiful, a love story written not in the pages of her novels, but in the everyday moments of their shared life. The last light of day faded from the sky, and one by one, stars appeared above the Wyoming plains. Inside, their children laughed, their home hummed with life, and Eliza Whittaker knew with absolute certainty that sometimes, even in the wild unpredictability of frontier life, happy endings weren't just the stuff of fiction. Sometimes they were as real as the man standing beside her, as enduring as the love they'd found amid chaos, as bright as the future stretching before them. "I love you, Cole Whittaker," she whispered, standing on tiptoe to kiss him as night settled fully around them. His smile, still able to quicken her heart after all these years, was answer enough. But he said the words anyway, words that never grew old no matter how often they were spoken. "I love you too, Eliza. Yesterday, today, and all the tomorrows we have left." And in that moment, on a homestead once shadowed by fear but now illuminated by joy, their story continued, not ending but evolving, growing richer with each passing season, each shared triumph, each obstacle overcome together. For that was the true nature of their love, not a single dramatic confrontation in a yard, but the 1,000 quiet moments that followed, building day by day into a life more beautiful than either could have dreamed.